In today's video, we are going to be covering a potential theory video for what the next God of War game might entail. For this one, we're specifically going to focus on Celtic mythology and what a Atreus spinoff in Celtic mythology might mean. We'll talk about gameplay details that might happen in regards to small things that might change. We'll talk about the combat system and how that'll likely be revamped if there is a new protagonist. And we'll also talk about potential bosses, because what is God of War without bosses? So let's get started. One change I could see being made to the gameplay is the addition of horseback riding. Now, we have seen additional transportation systems introduced in the last few God of War entries. In Ragnarok, we got this sled, and in the previous game, we got the boat. So adding a horse that you could ride makes a little bit of sense, especially if we're playing as Atreus, who's got a much more slight build compared to Kratos. So it wouldn't look as weird with a normal-sized horse. Additionally, since it would be in Ireland or Greater UK, depending on what parts of Celtic lore they take on, there'd be a lot of wide open grassy fields, so horse would be perfectly equipped for that. In addition to this, I think we would get a new combat companion. Angrboda could carry over. We've seen her moveset already with the throwing the paints at enemies. Could be improved and given a skill tree similar to what we saw with Freya and Atreus in Ragnarok. I could also see Chulane being introduced. He would be right at home with God of War mythos and would be add an interesting, more combat-oriented rather than support-oriented option. And perhaps depending on how they do the actual lore, they could introduce Arthurian legend. So potentially King Arthur as a companion, maybe just for some small missions, sort of like how Thor was used in Ragnarok, because he'd probably be a bit too strong as a normal companion. But those would be great to see. Another one would be additional waypoint navigation options, because as they were in Ragnarok, they were definitely improved from 2018, but they're still way below par compared to the other Sony first-party games, especially if you were in Vanaheim. I had massive issues with trying to mark a waypoint on Vanaheim and then go there, because with the day-night cycle, it wouldn't necessarily actively adjust you to where you're supposed to go. So you would have issues with that generally. So hopefully with the next game, they'll have that ironed out. I have full faith in Sony Santa Monica to get that sorted, but we shall see. Next up is I could see them bringing back some of the more intricate architectural locations like palaces and castles. Now, there were some of those in Ragnarok in 2018, but not nearly as many as the original games, where you had, I believe, Poseidon's palace and all kinds of other palaces, Hades in the underworld. There was a lot more like well built up settlements rather than the small, more intimate locations of the newest two games. So I would love to see a full-on castle and kingdom with the entire village in the next game. In addition to that, maybe have some kind of palace for Oberon would probably be a good one to have a palace. I mean, we've heard legends of him through Mimir, so having him introduced in the next game, especially if it was in Celtic lore, feels like a match made in heaven. Whether or not he would be supporting the protagonist, an antagonist, a villain, that remains to be seen, but I'd certainly love to see him if they go this direction with the game. Obviously, with Ireland, Britain, there's a lot of options with old historical areas. One thing that I definitely would want to see would be Hadrian's Wall. I know for any of you that have played Assassin's Creed games, you've probably seen Hadrian's Wall in Valhalla, and I would love to see it in its full original glory, and hopefully have that be scalable with Atreus' movement. Plus, it would give us a little better idea of, if God of War ever went to Chinese mythos, what we could expect from a Great Wall of China, because that would be an insane location. Alright, so moving off the gameplay and setting a little bit, we're going to actually move deeper into the actual combat system. So, Ragnarok, we saw Atreus mainly using a bow, which I feel like is a good thing to carry over into the next game, but they definitely need to change a lot of things and add more customization. So, just based on basic stuff they could change, arrow tips with different magic effects would be a very welcome one, allow for a lot of different playstyles. The actual bowstring and bow design would be another one to change, not just cosmetically, but it would also be very nice to have the ability to switch between a quick firing light bow or a very long draw heavy bow that does a ton of damage. I'm a fan of the Horizon games, so part of me just likes going back to customization on bows there, but I think they could put their own spin on it, make it cool, but also he does need other, it's God of War. He needs close range options. So we'd love to see a sword. Some kind of sword. Obviously Freyr's sword in the previous game was used, but that was more of a NPC companion that had a mind of its own. So having the option to have probably a short sword, some kind of short sword, Celtic themed, would be great to see. If not, maybe like a set of daggers. Something to play into Atreus being a more shifty playstyle than Kratos is, I'm going to stand here, be rooted in the ground, and have brutal attacks. In addition to that, being able to put elemental magics and just different Jotnir magics into his weapons would be fantastic. Something like, he is technically Loki, so some kind of after image strikes with the blade, or like he sets up a clone, or sets up like an after image clone that gets hit, and you get like a backstab or something. Also, potentially, I know we had a spear with Kratos, but it was more of like a heavy spear, especially with the fact that you use the back end of the spear a lot. So something a lot more like a light spear, or perhaps even a long lance could be great to see, especially if Chu Lane is the one that trains him on how to use it. So I mean, those are a few options for weapon stuff. Additionally, for the bow, I'd love to see specific finishing moves. So like the ability to, you say you finish an enemy with a bow and then you fire another arrow over its shoulder, or something that allows you to use the bow as like a grapple function. Obviously, we saw a basic grapple, but the ability to just like chain target enemy grapples would be great to use with a bow or whatever dagger or weapon combo they decide to give Atreus in the next game. Next up, we are going to be talking about the magic system. So obviously, Atreus had the options to have wolves and bear in this game. So those are nice and all, but we definitely need more options. Hopefully some other animals we'll see for magic, but also the ability to like have skills that are actually under those trees. So whether that be if you're say you invest in the bear tree, you'll have extra health, have unblockable attacks, something like that. Whereas if you invest in the wolf tree, maybe you have quicker attacks or a special move that allows you to get out, like dodge out of combat or something of the like. So pretty much just additional auxiliary skills that go in to bolster the base skills and transformations. Next up, we are going to talk about bosses. So Celtic lore, I think Chu Lane will be featured, so I'm not sure if he would be like an actual boss that you fight. But if you were to fight him per se, it could be as sort of like how they did with Tyr, where it's not a villain fight, it's more a sparring match. So he would be a cool boss to expect. But the main ones I do want to focus on are what would replace the optional super bosses. So Valkyries and Berserkers, respectively, from the previous two games. Each of those had 9 plus the additional top tier boss. So maybe having 3 or 4 in a smaller scale spin-off game, having 3 or 4 optional hidden bosses under that type of thing would probably be the best way to go. And what better way than the Knights of the Round Table? It could be an Arthurian quest where he gives you a quest of to go either find his corrupted knights or just go spar with them, and they each have a different knife or sword-based discipline that you get some kind of skill from defeating them. So you could have Lancelot, Gawain, Percival as options. Additionally, Galahad, Bors. There's plenty of other options for Knights of the Round Table, especially if they wanted to go even farther and have the same 9 that they've had in the previous 2 games. But they each have their own different spins on combat, and perhaps at the end, you spar with King Arthur. And that's the optional super boss for that particular set. Another thing I would love to see is a fight against the god Balor, because it's God of War. You got to fight some kind of god, and it would certainly be cool to see him fight, especially because of his like different his how important he is to the lore of Celtic mythology. And there's a lot of things they could do with how he's depicted, and also because heritagely he's technically a giant, he could technically be from Norse myth in this version that they do, and have Atreus having to deal with that and try to bring him back, even if he's, say, corrupted or angry or doesn't want to come back to the Jotnar. So that could be a definitely interesting dynamic to have there. I could see that as a main game boss fight rather than an optional one, but it would definitely be something we would want to see. Other than that, let me know what your thoughts are on different stuff. Obviously, we could see Titania, Fairy Queen, depending on how deep they go into Mir's backstory. But I'm sure that there's plenty to explore in this, and it'd be an interesting setting for a 10 to say 25-hour game, depending on side content and stuff. Probably 10-hour main story, 10 to 15 main story, and then 25 to do everything. But yeah, see you guys with more videos.